my sister gifted me a DNA test for my birthday, laughing, "Maybe this will explain why you are another man's mistake in this family." Months later, when our family's estate lawyer called them for an urgent meeting about me, their faces went pale. That cold truth, delivered with the casual cruelty of Naomi, was the perfect summation of my life in the Ellington house. I had spent 35 years learning to make myself small, to minimize my presence in the shadow of my sister's brilliant, exhausting orbit. Austin, my current home, was a soft, neutral landscape that suited me perfectly. It was quiet mornings, simple routines, the kind of stability I had never known growing up in Denver. I worked as a financial analyst, the numbers and logic a soothing balm against the emotional chaos that always seemed to follow my family. But my father, James Ellington, had been the only steady thing in that beautiful house, with the cold marble floors. He was a man of few words but surprising warmth, and when he passed away, the gravity of our family's expectations dragged me back to Denver. 3 months after the funeral, Mom, Evelyn, insisted on a small birthday dinner. Her voice over the phone was too bright, too rehearsed, like a monologue she was trying to remember. When I stepped through the front door, the air smelled of lemon polish and old books, but it felt hollow without Dad's quiet presence. Naomi was already seated at the kitchen table, freshly tanned from a recent trip, flipping through glossy resort brochures. She barely glanced up, offering a clipped Serenity, as if my name were a chore. Mom was pouring more wine than usual, her hands trembling slightly against the heavy crystal. A massive, silent storm hung in the air, the kind that had been brewing for decades. I tried asking about the will gently, respectfully. "Has Mr. Dalton set a date for the reading?" Mom's smile stiffened, freezing on her face. "We are just not ready yet," she said, but her eyes flicked nervously toward Naomi, and my sister responded with a small, knowing smirk. It was the smirk that confirmed everything I had felt since I walked in this dinner. Was never about celebrating my birthday. It was about setting the stage for a humiliation they had already planned. The tension crept in slowly, like a draft under a closed door. But when Naomi pushed back her chair dramatically, reaching for a glossy silver box, the temperature in the room plummeted. "Actually," she said, ignoring my mother's sudden, terrified whimper of, "Naomi," and slid the box across the table. "I brought a birthday gift. Something I think you will find enlightening." I peeled back the silver paper, the silence in the room pressing against my eardrums. Inside was a DNA testing kit. Naomi leaned in, her voice low and filled with razor-thin satisfaction. "Go on," she whispered, her eyes glittering. "Maybe this will explain why you are another man's mistake in this family." Mom flinched, her complexion draining to a pasty white, but she said absolutely nothing. The sting of Naomi's words was familiar, but the terror in Mom's eyes felt like the real truth. They already knew. Naomi had just exposed something that was supposed to stay buried. Later that night, sitting alone in my old bedroom, the walls painted the exact soft blue I had chosen at 15, I decided. Naomi had delivered the kit like a weapon, anticipating my flight. Fine. I would mail it the next morning, not for her, but because I finally needed to know the truth she was so eager to use against me. I retreated to my childhood bedroom. The shock of Naomi's cruel gift turned into a cold, desperate curiosity. The walls were still painted the soft blue I had chosen at 15, but the room felt alien now. A museum dedicated to a girl who never truly belonged here. I moved through the familiar space like an archaeologist, searching for evidence of my own existence. I knew Naomi wanted me to leave the secret buried, the DNA test unopened, letting the shame fester. But Naomi had miscalculated. She had handed me the tool to dismantle the foundations of my decades-long emotional ache. The urge to search was overwhelming. I went through old boxes, photo albums, and journals. A vain attempt to find a single piece of tangible proof that I was a daughter, not a burden. It was at the back of my closet, tucked beneath a pile of faded university sweatshirts, that I found in an envelope that did not belong. The dust on the floor around it had been subtly disturbed. Recently. Someone had accessed this area not long ago. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out. It was a thick, white envelope, the kind that held important, unsaid things. Inside, there was a single, slightly faded photograph. It was Evelyn, much younger, perhaps in her late 20s, holding me as a baby. She looked tired but undeniably maternal. Standing next to her was a man I did not recognize. He had warm eyes and a kind, squared jawline. The features entirely foreign to the Ellington family. I turned the photograph over, and there, in my mother's unmistakable, sloping handwriting, was a single, devastating word: forgive me. In that instant, the lifelong feeling of being an outsider, of always moving through rooms slightly out of phase with my family, clicked into stark reality. It was not just a feeling. It was a fact, confirmed by an image and a plea for forgiveness penned decades ago. The photograph was proof of the secret, but the guilt in my mother's handwriting was proof of the betrayal. I took pictures of everything with my phone. The envelope, the front of the photo, the handwritten plea on the back, documenting the truth before anyone could sweep it away again. Then, I retrieved the silver box, the DNA kit, the instrument of Naomi's malicious intent, suddenly transformed in my hands. It was no longer a tool of humiliation. It was the key to my freedom. Naomi had wanted me to take it. She had wanted something to happen that would confirm her own status and superiority. Fine. I would give her what she wanted. But not for the reasons she imagined. I would mail the kit the next morning, not to fulfill her cruel joke, but because I needed to know the identity of the man in the photograph, the truth that they were so eager to weaponize against me. I needed to know what truth Naomi was so certain would erase me from my father's will and my mother's life. As I packaged the small vial in its plastic sleeve, a profound shift occurred inside me. The fear of being a mistake, the shame I had carried for over 30 years, began to harden into something colder, sharper. A fixed determination. If they had built their lives on a foundation of secrecy and conditional love, then I would tear that house down with absolute, undeniable fact. I would use their weapon to find my own liberation. I realized I was not looking for a father anymore. I was looking for the evidence that would allow me to finally confront the people who had always made me feel less than. This was not Drade. This was the terrifying clarity of a woman who finally understood the game being played against her. A little over a month later, Serenity was back in the sterile comfort of her Austin office, the mailed DNA kit now a memory, until the email notification flashed on her phone. I was halfway listening to the low, monotonous hum of the office vents, reviewing a complicated investment portfolio, when the subject line of the email pulled me out of my professional detachment. Your results are ready. I expected a rush of dread, the kind of heavy anxiety I had carried since that dinner. What hit me instead was cold, sharp clarity. Undeniable. I clicked the link, bypassing the fear. Moving straight to the facts. The results confirmed precisely what I had suspected for a lifetime, and what Naomi had intended as a punchline. No biological relationship detected with the Ellington family. My breath hitched, a small, tight knot in my chest, but I kept reading. There was an suggested lineage match. Hartman lineage. A name I had never spoken, never heard, now linked to me by blood. It did not hurt the way I had always imagined the truth would. It simply felt like the confirmation of a fact I had always sensed. I was a guest in my own childhood, never a daughter. My life in the Ellington house had been a meticulous performance in someone else's play. The true emotional tremor came with what I did next. I took a screenshot of the undeniable evidence and sent it to the family group chat. Not a lengthy explanation, no dramatics. Just the image of the result and a simple question. Does anyone want to explain this? My phone buzzed almost instantly, not with a text, but with a call from Denver. It was Mom. She was sobbing, but the tears were not born of remorse or apology. They were thick with panic. "Serenity, sweetheart, please delete that," she choked out, the familiar, fragile whisper laced with raw terror. "You don't understand. This is complicated. Things happened a long time ago. We moved past them." She never addressed the decades I spent feeling like a burden, the constant low, grade heart-hatch of her conditional affection. She only begged me to bury the truth again, to save her from the consequences of her secret. The betrayal stung, but the immediate impulse to hide the truth confirmed that their primary motivation was self-preservation, not love. Naomi, however, did not call. She responded immediately via text. Just 4 words, cold and perfectly spaced. "Well, now you know." There was no confusion, no denial, no regret. Just profound, satisfied vindication. It was as if she had been waiting half her life for the precise moment I discovered I did not belong. The message was a victory lap. That night, alone in my quiet Austin apartment, shaking with questions I suddenly knew how to ask, I called her. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice dripping with irritation at the disruption. "Why, Serenity? Why now?" she demanded, her toning I was the one making the mess. "Why push this?" I demanded, my own voice shaking, but steadying with every syllable. "Why humiliate me? Why did you make this into a public attack?" She laughed softly, a low sound that hit like chipping ice. "Because I have kept this family secret for 20 years. She said, the words slow and calculated. "Because Mom owed me. Because you have played victim long enough. And now the right people will finally get what they deserve." She hung up without another word. Her sentence, "The right people will finally get what they deserve," clung to me like smoke, a chilling confirmation of her true motive. This was not about rivalry or petty sibling jealousy. This was about money, inheritance, and a calculated attempt to use a biological truth to initiate a legal erasure. The clarity of the DNA results was one thing, but the conspiracy behind it was another, transforming my dread into focused, strategic anger. I was no longer seeking emotional closure. I was fighting for my survival against a conspiracy that had just escalated into open war. Naomi's words, "The right people will finally get what they deserve," clung to Serenity like smoke, a dark, toxic residue from her sister's true intentions. It was no longer a personal feud. It was a financial and legal threat. The knowledge that they were actively trying to erase me from the family narrative, and more importantly, from my father's legacy, galvanized me into action. I realized that my years of quiet avoidance were over. I needed a shield, not just closure. The next morning, I started asking quiet questions. I focused my analytical mind, turning my financial expertise toward my own family history. I spoke to old neighbors, distant cousins, and friends who had known my parents before Naomi and I were born. What emerged chilled me. Naomi had been digging for months, meeting with estate lawyers in Denver, far from Austin, hinting to people that there were upcoming changes to the Ellington inheritance. She had been talking as if my father's estate already belonged exclusively to her, long before the DNA test arrived. The test was not an investigation. It was a final piece of paperwork designed to confirm a conclusion she had already worked hard to achieve. I needed real help. The kind of shrewd, professional protection my father, James, would have quietly insisted I seek. So, I hired an attorney. I found Sarah Ang, a formidable woman known for her exceptional work in complicated inheritance disputes. Her reputation was that of calm, meticulous rigor, a perfect foil to the Ellington melodrama. I flew back to Denver for the initial consultation, carrying everything: the screenshot of the DNA results, The faded photograph with my mother's handwritten "Forgive me" scrawled on the back, the screenshots of Naomi's arrogant text messages, and the odd, fearful conversations I'd had with Evelyn. Sarah listened without interruption, her expression still, taking notes on a yellow pad, as though she were assembling a complex puzzle. Her stillness was reassuring. It anchored me in the belief that this was a legal matter, not a personal failing. "Your instincts are right," Sarah said finally, setting her pen down. Her voice was steady and objective. "This is not just resentment or family drama. Someone is building a deliberate case to erase you from your father's estate. The DNA results would be a strong foundation for their argument, provided your father's will didn't anticipate this exact contingency." The realization that my father, James, might have foreseen this conspiracy shifted my core. Could the quiet man who simply put a hand on my shoulder have been preparing for this war long before it was declared? 3 days later, I was back in Austin when I got the call that truly changed everything. It was Mr. Dalton, our longtime family estate lawyer. His tone was unusually formal, the kind of grave professionalism that signaled a point of no return. "Serenity," he said. "Your father, James Ellington, left instructions for a will reading under specific, preemptive circumstances. Those circumstances, I am afraid, have now been met." A wave of cold dread washed over me. But I forced myself to listen. "I think you should be prepared for what you are going to hear, Serenity. It is more complicated than any of us anticipated." Prepared? I doubted anyone could have been prepared for the cold, calculated web of betrayal and protection that was about to be revealed. I hung up the phone and immediately called Sarah. The time for quiet investigation was over. The time for the public confrontation was here. And I had to walk into the heart of the storm, knowing that my sister was fully confident she had already won. The warning in Mr. Dalton's voice, "I prepared for what you're going to hear," hung heavy over Serenity as she drove with Sarah to the downtown Denver office. The morning felt unnaturally cold, not a seasonal chill, but the kind of deep cold that sinks into the bone, like a premonition. The downtown building was imposing. Floor-to-ceiling windows, dark mahogany wood, and hushed halls. It was the kind of place where truths did not hide, they echoed. Mr. Dalton's office occupied the top floor, giving us a view of the sprawling city that looked both beautiful and entirely indifferent to the persona unfolding in the room. Sarah and I arrived early. We chose seats near the window, slightly out of the direct line of fire. Sarah's calm presence was a lifeline. "Observe everything," she whispered, her voice low and steady. "Speak only when necessary. Let them hang themselves with their own confidence." Her steadiness eased the tightness in my chest, allowing me to shift my focus from fear to focused observation. I had endured decades of emotional warfare. I could endure a couple of hours of legal warfare. Mom arrived next. Evelyn looked exhausted, as though she had not slept soundly since that infamous birthday dinner. Her typically elegant hair was hastily pinned back, and her silk blouse looked rumpled. She clutched her expensive purse with both hands, using it as a life raft. She did not greet me. She did not meet my eyes. She simply shuffled to a chair at the far end of the long, polished conference table and stared at the dark wood surface, as though it might swallow her whole. Her guilt was a palpable, bitter presence in the room. Then Naomi entered. Her arrival was, as always, a dramatic performance. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor of the reception area, each step carrying a smug confidence that bordered on theatrical victory. She wore an expensive, cream-colored suit, perfectly tailored, and heavy makeup that made her features look sharper, harder. She was accompanied by her own attorney, a man I recognized from billboards around the city, boasting about aggressive estate litigation. He looked like a predator sensing a guaranteed kill. Naomi stopped just inside the room, surveying the scene. She gave me a slow, deliberate smile, one corner of her mouth lifted higher than the other, dripping with condescension. "Serenity," she said, as if greeting someone utterly irrelevant. But her eyes gleamed with expectation. The kind of greedy anticipation that said, she believed the battle was already over. And she was the clear, biological victor. She had the DNA test results, and in her mind, that fact alone was sufficient to legally erase me. The silence was broken only when Mr. Dalton entered, carrying a thick, official-looking folder. He moved with the deliberate, almost reluctant calm of someone who understood the sheer weight of what he was about to unleash. When he reached the head of the table, he paused, resting one hand on the folder. He looked at each of us, his gaze lingering briefly on Naomi's expectant face, and then on Mom's bowed head. "Before we begin," he said, his voice deep and formal, "I want to note that James Ellington left explicit instructions for how this reading should proceed. He anticipated complications. Everything I am about to share was prepared with full knowledge of circumstances that some of you may find surprising." Naomi shifted, her smug smirk faltering slightly at the mention of anticipated complications. But she quickly recovered. She believed the complication was my lack of biological connection, and she assumed my father had written me out in response. It was then, sitting there, facing Naomi's triumphant gleam and Mom's abject fear, that the full, agonizing memory of that dinner flooded my mind. My sister gifted me a DNA test for my birthday. Laughing, "Maybe this will explain why you're another man's mistake, of the family." Months later, when our family's estate lawyer called them for an urgent meeting about me, their faces went pale. I realized the profound irony they had all known, and they were all terrified. Not of the truth coming out, but of my father's planned response to their cruelty. My quiet father had been watching the entire time. I channeled the decades of humiliation, holding myself steady, bracing for the storm that was finally about to break. Mr. Dalton rested his hand on the thick folder. The silence of the room broken only by the clock's quiet tick. He opened the file, adjusted his glasses, and began reading the document that held the weight of my father's final intentions. "James Robert Ellington. Declare this my final will and testament." Dalton's voice resonated clearly through the expensive, quiet room. "I leave 70% of my estate, including the family home, investment accounts, and all assets, to my daughter, Serenity Ellington." The silence that followed was absolute, snapping across the room like a physical whip. It was a silence only broken by the sharp, audible gasp that escaped Naomi's throat. She shot to her feet with such force that her chair scraped violently against the marble floor. "She is not his daughter!" Naomi shrieked, her voice high and uncontrolled, stripping away her veneer of composed confidence. Her attorney immediately shifted, his jaw tight. "We have DNA proof. She has no legal claim to be listed as his child." Dalton did not raise his voice. He merely held up a single, steady hand. "Please sit. There is more." Naomi hesitated, vibrating with fury, but her attorney's hand clamped down firmly on her arm, urging her to comply. She sank back into the chair. Though her jaw was clenched so tightly I thought she might crack a tooth. Her eyes, fixed on Dalton, were pure rage and disbelief. She simply could not process that the test she herself had provided could result in her total loss. Dalton continued reading, his gaze steady as he watched the unfolding drama. "I have known since Serenity was 2 years old that she is not my biological child. I chose to raise her anyway. I choose to leave her my legacy because she alone has proven worthy of it. This decision requires no further validation." The words hit the room like a hammer blow. The shock was complete. Naomi's complexion drained to a pasty gray, the color of wet cement. Mom, who had been staring fixedly at the tabletop, closed her eyes, a sharp line of pain tightening her features. It was not the money that mattered in that moment. It was the revelation that my father had known the truth all along. He had carried the secret, not as a source of shame or evasion like my mother, but as a deliberate choice. He saw me, he chose me, and he wrote his will to affirm that choice, knowing exactly what my sister would attempt. The lifelong feeling of being a mistake vanished, replaced by the profound, powerful warmth of being seen and fiercely protected. Naomi's attorney finally leaned toward her, whispering urgently, "This is an explicit acknowledgement of the parentage issue. You cannot overturn this on the basis of biology." He anticipated it. Naomi ignored him. Her eyes were fixed on the folder, desperate to find the flaw. She looked like a trapped animal. Her entitlement shattered by the quiet strength of the man she had underestimated the most. The will itself was now a testament to her failure to grasp integrity. She had built her entire legal strategy around a truth my father had already absorbed, processed, and ultimately nullified with the simple power of his unwavering affection. Serenity Ellington was his daughter, not by genetics, but by a decision that transcended biology, delivered as a decisive legal blow against the conspiracy. As Naomi reeled from the revelation of the chosen daughter, utterly defeated by the emotional weight of the will's acknowledgement, Mr. Dalton was far from finished. He had merely delivered the emotional preamble. Now, he began to deliver the strategic hammer blow. But Mr. Ellington did more than simply state his intentions. Dalton continued, his voice regaining a crisp, professional edge. 8 months before his death, anticipating attempts to manipulate or interfere with his estate, Mr. Ellington hired a private investigator. A collective intake of breath swept through the room. Naomi's attorney stiffened, his professional facade momentarily cracking. I felt Sarah's hand, resting lightly on my arm, signaling a major turning point. Us. The quiet man of few words had been playing three-dimensional chess. Dalton placed a stack of documents onto the table: payment logs, unauthorized withdrawal records, meeting transcripts, and detailed reports. The investigator gathered substantial evidence, Dalton stated, his voice now cold and purely factual. He detailed Naomi Ellington's efforts to pressure her sick father into altering his will. He including unauthorized withdrawals totaling $50,000 during his illness. He methodically described how she had consulted with 3 different estate lawyers, all documented, discussing upcoming changes to the family inheritance, and, most damningly, the purchase of a DNA test that was later mailed to Naomi's home address and gift-wrapped. Naomi's face, which had been gray, now flushed a mottled red. "That's ridiculous," she sputtered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "That was a joke. A family joke. The investigator's report and the estate's financial records indicate otherwise." Dalton replied calmly, unmoved by her distress. He then set down a final, single sheet of paper, a handwritten note in my father's unmistakable script. "Script?" Ellington requested that I read this aloud. He unfolded the page. "Naomi, I know what you have been planning. I watched you try to manipulate your mother. I watched you try to take advantage of me in my illness. I hoped you would choose differently. These consequences are your own doing." A sound escaped Naomi's throat. A low guttural growl. Her attorney finally intervened, leaning toward her, his voice a harsh, low whisper. "Do not contest this, Naomi. There is a no contest clause. You will lose everything." But Naomi was spiraling, years of bitter entitlement and calculated malice colliding all at once. "This is fraud," she spat, turning toward me, her eyes well-deed. "Serenity manipulated him. She tricked a dying man." Sarah stood slowly, her voice quiet, but carrying immense power. "The will explicitly acknowledges Serenity's parentage and documents Mr. Ellington's reasoning. Any contest would be frivolous and, as noted, trigger the no contest clause." Sarah paused, letting the silence build, then delivered the final, crippling blow. The trigger includes the repayment of all outstanding loans made from the estate to Naomi Ellington. Approximately $200,000. Due immediately. Naomi's face twisted in horror. That's not a loan? He gave me that money? Not according to the estate records. Dalton countered. It was logged as a promissory note. Mom finally broke her silence, her voice a fragile, desperate whisper. Naomi, stop. Please, stop. But Naomi could not. She was consumed. This should be mine, she hissed, tears finally cutting paths through her heavy makeup. All of it? I'm the real daughter. I'm the one who stayed. I stood, my voice steady, finally giving voice to the truth I had carried silently for decades. You did not stay, Naomi. You controlled. You threatened. You built your life on secrets you never earned. She stared at me, her defeat complete. This was not my victory over her. It was her defeat, mine. Meticulously crafted by the quiet man she had underestimated the most. The devastating silence that followed Naomi's defeat was eventually broken by Mr. Dalton. He held a final, small envelope addressed only to me. It was the only item in the entire meeting that was purely personal, not legal. Serenity, he said gently, handing me the letter. There is something else your father left. He requested you read this when everything else was complete. My hands shook slightly as I opened the envelope. Inside was a short, handwritten note from James Ellington. I unfolded the page, and the world seemed to hold its breath. I read the words, and they washed away 5 years of self-doubt and shame. Serenity, you spent your life believing you were invisible. You were not. I saw your strength, your kindness, your integrity. You were my daughter, not by blood, but by choice. And I leave you my legacy with absolute certainty that you will honor it. My vision blurred. It was not the money. It was the absolute, unearned, unconditional validation that melted the ice around my heart. In one short, powerful letter, James Ellington confirmed that I had been chosen. I had been seen. I was worthy. This was the true inheritance, the one Naomi could never have touched, let alone understood. When I looked up, Naomi was staring at me, and in that moment, she finally understood. This was not my victory over her. It was her defeat, meticulously orchestrated by the man she had dismissed as quietly knave. The man whose protection of me was absolute. The legal fallout came swiftly and decisively. Naomi's high-profile attorney withdrew the next morning, unwilling to argue a case that had already collapsed under the weight of documented evidence and her own impulsive outburst. When she attempted to contest the will anyway, using a local, desperate lawyer, the judge dismissed it almost immediately. The no contest clause, Sarah assured me, was airtight. Naomi's inheritance vanished entirely. The $200,000 loan she had taken from my father immediately converted into personal debt, owed back to the estate. The $50,000 unauthorized withdrawals were also documented, and she was given 1 year to repay the entire $250,000 total or face serious legal action. For the first time in my life, Naomi looked small and cornered, stripped of her entitlement and faced with the real consequences she had always managed to outrun. A week later, Evelyn came to see me in my Austin apartment. She sat on my couch, hands folded tightly, eyes red, rimmed and exhausted. She finally told me everything. The truth about my biological father, the rushed decisions, the agreement she made decades ago, and the crushing guilt she carried, but never had the courage to confront. She spoke of her weakness, not her love, and of the fear of social judgment that had ruled her life. I listened. I heard the words, but I did not reach for her. I want to make things right, she whispered, her voice fragile. I believe you want to, I replied, my voice steady. I felt no rage, only distance. But making things right starts with letting me live my life without carrying your secrets anymore. Some wounds required distance, not closeness. In the months that followed, I stepped back from Denver entirely. I managed the estate with Sarah's help, liquidated the old house, settled accounts, and quietly, deliberately, chose the life I wanted next. It was the first time I made a major choice, not career or location, but life direction, without asking who it might disappoint. I left Denver and built a quieter life in Oregon, where the coastal air was clean, and the lies could not reach me anymore. Some endings are not loud, dramatic explosions. They are the sound of a door clicking shut on a cold, empty room, and the liberating relief of choosing peace over pain. If you have ever been the overlooked one, the mistake, or the burden, know this: you are seen, you are worthy, and you deserve better than the people who failed to choose you.